FDA Monthly Podcast. Today's podcast is a continuation of Religion and Democracy Part 2. The topic of the podcast is, what is the threshold for banning secular and religious-based political parties in a democratic society? The panel for the podcast is comprised of Mr. Randy Tyson, Officer of the Center for Inquiry, Mr. Artur Pawlowski, pastor at the Street Church Ministries out of Calgary and member of the Christian Heritage Party of Canada, Miss Lindsay Tetlock, FDA researcher and auditor, Mr. Brian Seaman, research associate with the Alberta Civil Liberties Research Centre, Mr. Adam Idris, past director of the Muslim Council of Calgary, an active member of the Muslim Christian Dialogue, and finally, Mr. Lawrence Irwin, pastor at the Centre Street Church based out of Calgary. The chair of the podcast tonight is Mr. Stephen Garvey, FDA Executive Director.
You cannot form and legalize an organization that entices hatred, because if you legalize that, you are, as a country, in fact, agreeing with their views. You cannot do that because that's what kills democracy. A Hamas that comes and hates democracy, brings dictatorship, there goes your democracy. It's like shooting yourself in the foot while you're running a marathon.
You're absolutely right. But see, the thing is that Hamas can't hate democracy because 1,600 electoral officials from the European Union actually saw Hamas get elected with a 70% margin over.
Do you hear the testimonies of the people? Because I can tell you one. I was forced. They came to my house and they said, if I will not vote for Hamas, my children are going to be shot. What kind of democracy is that under Hamas? Because you know what I think? If I saw my 3 children at the gunpoint, I think I would vote Hamas too, as the best party in the whole world, for the sake of my children.
I think the fact is that you could just throw words together and actually come up with something that somebody has said. Just take words at random, throw them in a blender, and somebody will have said that. But the fact of the matter is, I have to defer because I will take the opinion of the 1,600 observers there when there are people that are living in extraordinary conditions, and I'm not here to make a judgment call about who's right or who's wrong.
Look at Afghanistan.
But please let me.
There's not a democracy there. It's a false democracy.
But we're going to speak to we're going to speak to the fundamental issue here, is that when people are under duress, as was the case in the occupied Palestinian territories, that's when those decisions are going to be informed by their experiences. So false democracy or not, when you have 1,600 UN observers that actually said that the election, for the most part, was fair. See, for the most part was fair. I mean,
only 2,000 machine guns.
I'm going to have to cut in here. But Adam, you got to be careful because we just finished doing the FDA just finished doing a study on the DRC. And in our research, we read observer reports.
Sorry, what is the DRC?
The Democratic Republic of the Congo.
Okay. And they were saying the 2000 elections were free, fair, equal.
It's a joke.
We finished our study. They got 3.75% out of 100% for electoral fairness.
Mm-hmm.
It's an authoritarian regime there. It's muddled with this foreign interference because they're trying to promote democracy and they're trying to stabilize the area.
Yeah.
It's a complete joke.
Yeah, no.
But I want to put this in context now, the world context now. This is based on the FDA Global Electoral Audit, which is ongoing. In Lebanon, the electoral representation in the parliament is divided 50% for Muslims, 50% for Christians. Non-Christians, non-Muslim religious parties are banned. Atheist parties are banned in Lebanon, just to put that in context. The DRC, it says here from the Law number 4, 2002, concerning the organization and operation of political parties, quote, parties may not reflect the special interests of a particular family, tribe, ethnic group, province, race, religion, language, gender, or other origin. Any party that falls in those categories are banned. Egypt under Mubarak, this is from Law 73 for 1956, exercising political rights. It says here, quote, a political party shall not be founded on religious, class, sectarian, categorical, geographical basis, end of quote. Russia, this is based on their federal law number 95, July 2001 on political parties. The creation of political parties on a professional, racial, national, and religious basis shall not be allowed. Afghanistan, it says under the Political Parties Law Act, Article 6, political parties shall not pursue objectives that are opposed to the principles of the holy religion Islam. So basically, you can't have a Christian religious-based party, you can't have a secular-based party. In Canada, interestingly enough, the Communist Party of Canada, for example, was made illegal in 1921 under the War Measures Act. In the 1930s, it was banned in Canada. Under the Conservatives, the Mulroney regime, they actually put forth legislation that virtually banned the Communist Party and other small parties because they placed a limit. You have to have 50 candidates or more to be registered.
Oh.
Also, they were playing games with the financing. You had to put up $200 for each candidate to be registered, and they upped it to $1,000.
I think that was because of the Rhino.
But the point is, they were banning this. It actually went to the Supreme Court, and they ruled against the Mulroney government. But right now in Canada, I'm going to talk about there is what's called, I would argue, it's a non-transparent banning of certain political parties in Canada. Right now, the barrier,
in effect, it's not named.
It's not named, but the barrier to entries is almost minimal for a party in Canada.
That's a good point.
There's a minimal barrier to entry, but when you're in, there's all kinds of barriers to entry. I'll give you an example. The last federal election, we had the national debates. There was 19 registered parties. Only 4 of them were allowed to participate. Who decided it? Private Media Consortium. That's only one example. And then there's also the large media in Canada. It's owned by 2 families. How pluralistic is the media? All you hear about is 3 or 4 parties.
Yeah, that's
so there is banning going on in this country. It's just it's deceitful.
It's de facto.
It's actually deceitful, and it's undermining our democracy. And the same applies to the U.S. We did a study on their federal system. As far as I'm concerned, it's a legislated 2-party system. And I say that because all the legislation is favoring the Republicans and Democrats.
Yeah.
Smaller parties like Nader as a Green Party or as an independent do not stand a chance. To put this in context, in the last federal election in the U.S., Obama had $800 million at his disposal. Nader had $4 million. How's that fair? Where's the fair playing field in a democracy? We're talking about people voting. It's the will of the people. This is going on in our own countries.
But who, sir, are you pointing the finger at?
I'm just saying, there's banning going on now.
But let's talk about who's to blame. Okay, there's
I'm
banning.
not blaming anyone.
Let's blame somebody.
Let me finish.
Blame somebody. I'll blame you. I'll blame me. I'll blame
me
everybody
finish.
else.
I want to talk about
We're
Syria
the ones that
now.
allowed that happen.
Syria, too. Syria has banning going on. New political parties in Syria have to be allied to, created by, or friends of the Ba'ath Party. And the party founders have to be 35 years old, have no criminal record, and proven supporters of the Ba'ath March 8th revolution. You have to be supporting that to be a political party. So that's a form of banning. In Spain, it's the same thing. All they had since they had Franco, the dictator Franco was booted out, is 2 parties. And again, we looked at their legislation, and it's totally geared to that. Unfortunately, some of the victims of this is the parties like the Christian Heritage who are completely sidelined. I open the floor to this.
Here's the thing. I mean, we'll look at. You mentioned a couple of countries that would be in our list of, and I'm using air quotes. It's on podcast. You can't see this. Functioning democracies. You mentioned the United States. I mean, in order to be a prime minister in Britain or the head of state in Britain, you have to be Anglican. That's a must. You have to be. In order to be something president of the United States, you have to be born in the United States. That's why there was a big controversy about
what is Obama doing
Barack Obama was doing. So
he was born in Kenya.
So
just for the record.
So the idea is, okay, the people are banned. Okay, we agree that there's de facto banning in contemporary Western societies, and there's outright banning in other societies. I could only speak to the de facto banning here in Canada. We allow it to happen because we're not exercising the true free marketplace of ideas. I mean, we just aren't doing it.
Where is a country exercising that?
But it's the people's fault. You actually have to point the finger where it belongs.
There is no perfect democracy.
You can't point,
there is no perfect.
You can't actually point the finger anywhere except the people. The society itself is made up of people, and therefore, you break it down, people are the problem.
But
If
also
we-
the
if-
system.
The system was created by people. It seems counterintuitive to blame anybody else except for. I mean, if
Well, there's
people,
nobody else to
if people, exactly, if people demanded an alternative to the Democrats and the Republicans, they would get one. That's the thing. We are complacent. The people that exercise democracy the least are the people that are given democracy. We like things slotted into two categories: Flames versus Oilers, Republicans versus Democrats, liberals versus conservatives. That's just the way that we do things. And I don't blame the media for taking advantage of a situation that already exists, unless we want to make laws to actually make telling the truth in media a law, because right now it is not a law for a news organization to stand up and report the truth. And even if it were a law, they'd pepper the word allegedly through the news broadcast, and you don't know left from right, up from down.
But there are countries out there that advocate nonpartisanship, balanced reporting in the media. Venezuela has a lot of legislation on that. It's actually written in their constitution, fair, balanced coverage. France as well.
But what does
Has
that mean?
strict limits on political advertising, allows a plurality. They actually have media ownership concentration laws, which promote plurality of media. Same with Bolivia. But I just think we should put this in context, because we were thinking Canada is all this is great democracy. We don't even have ownership concentration laws in the media.
We don't.
It's so backward here.
It is.
You're right, it is part of the people, but you can't be too hard on them, because the people in power have taken advantage. It's kind of like the chicken or egg with the system. So right now we're in a difficult situation in Canada to put this in a bigger context, because I don't feel there's really any adequate checks on the Conservative government.
I'm
which
sorry,
is-
I agree with you. You know, we run into this all the
Yeah.
time. We had a discussion
Yeah.
at work earlier today about how my boss, Linda and Amy, we write regularly, right, for
Yeah.
a news syndicate organization called Tribe Media, and they send out our columns to 1,500 different newspapers across the country. But you know what? The Herald isn't picking up our columns. The Flin Flon Register picks up our columns. The Nowhereville, Saskatchewan Daily Times picks up our columns. Alberta papers are not picking up our columns.
But
I'm an excellent writer. She's an excellent writer. We're writing articles critical about the way things are done in this province. So it is obviously a political decision which is being taken in the levels of the editorial departments of.
Well, that's the thing. The
papers in
editorial
this province.
departments are political themselves. They are
Because who
very
owns the
partisan.
paper? Who owns the paper?
Yeah.
But there's actually members of the media being appointed to the Senate now.
I
Because
know.
that's how linked they are to
But
the
you
government.
want to
But
read
let's-
some
but
jokes?
go ahead, Adam.
Pick
But
up
let's-
Herald and Sun.
Yeah.
Let's talk about two things. The people are the ones that have the power. Stephen Harper would be kicked out of office if people found out that he was caught torturing a goldfish. Okay, but he's not getting kicked out of office because of media laws, and somebody would be tarred and feathered if they were caught in a homosexual relationship. Yet we will allow unfettered access from with policymakers and lobbyists. See, the thing is that this is a problem with our values. We'll throw somebody out of office. We'll make them hang themselves in shame because of animal cruelty or infidelity, but we will allow them an almost legendary level of corruption, and we'll turn the other cheek. It is our fault.
But the torture example doesn't apply. Because Harper was linked to torture in Afghanistan.
Yeah, but the thing is that if Harper was torturing,
He wasn't torturing, but
okay.
they were transferring prisoners, which they knew were
But that's the thing. If they were torturing people that we liked, if they were blonde-haired, blue-eyed guys named John and Jack and David,
Thank God you didn't include Brian in that
and
mix.
Brian,
Yeah.
then it would have been different. See, the thing is that when this is a reflection of what our values are, and the more distaste that we have for these people, I honestly believe that the most constructive place to direct that distaste is right out ourselves and make a commitment to improve the political environment in which we function.
So, Brian, Adam, how do you respond to what I'm saying, like in the context of Canada? And because you guys are in favor of not banning political parties,
Right, but
I'm arguing that this is going on, and to me, it's probably the worst kind of it because it's deceitful. It's kind of behind the scenes. It's hidden in the fine lines of the legislation. It's hidden in the murky waters of freedom of expression.
Yeah. It's not even.
So this is the worst.
parties
It's
you
almost like
wouldn't
out of
want
George
in power.
Orwell.
You're doing a great job as a moderator because you've brought up this very important issue. We have this kind of discussion all the time on a regular basis at work within the context of access to justice. Everybody has a right to their day in court, right? You got a right to defend yourself. You got a right to sue somebody if they've stolen money from you. But if you can't afford to hire a lawyer, of what use is this right? It's a very hollow right.
Yeah.
We get this all the time. I can't even begin to tell you the number of calls we get on a regular basis
Yeah.
from people who are making too much money to qualify for legal aid, but they're too poor to hire a lawyer. And if I needed a lawyer to defend myself against a drunk driving charge, I mean, sure, I can draw my line of credit, but I mean, it would be not too long before I'd be representing myself because my line of credit isn't enough to represent me all the way to the Court of Appeal if need be. So we do live in a democracy where we have these rights on paper, but the economics are meaning that these rights are getting increasingly hollow. And it is a very real problem. Thank you for bringing it up.
I'd like to remind my esteemed panelists that there's a big difference, and this is one of the biggest problems that we face today in contemporary Western societies, where a lot of us are just not informed enough to actually be impactful, is we confuse freedom with democracy. That is a huge problem. And people talk about democracy a lot. Democracy is a political system. Freedom is the actualization of what we hope democracy does. It's a manifestation, one manifestation of democracy. Yes. Another manifestation of democracy is that millions of people will vote for American Idol and nobody will vote for their municipal elections. Why? Because in a democracy you can't force people to vote. But there are some jurisdictions, Australia, for example, it's mandated. You vote unless you have a very, very good reason.
Yeah.
So that we cannot confuse and confound these things by tossing around words that feel good in exchange for other words that feel good. Liberty, freedom, democracy, love, peace, happiness, joy. All of these things are very, very different things. And just because there's a democracy, it doesn't mean that people are going to have access to a lawyer or access to the grocery store even. I mean, this isn't... We have a refined political process, but we're not a fair country, and we're not a fair society.
Yeah. Archer, the stuff we're talking about, it links back to what you were saying about extraordinary circumstances of banning, but I would argue that those extraordinary circumstances don't apply to us, but there is indirect banning going on of many parties in Canada.
Can I ask a direct question too?
Isn't that kind of that's almost on the flip side? That's worse, isn't it? Like
because they're not even fringe parties necessarily.
But they're actually labeled radicals.
Yeah.
How do you define a radical?
I'd like to hear the two representatives from the Christian Heritage Party address that, but also I would like you to address an even more particular question. One of Stephen Harper's pet projects was to get rid of that subsidy that parties used to get, where you got, $1.75 per vote cast. He wanted to get rid of that because he saw it as a way to cripple the Liberal Party, and that was how he spun it with his members. But I'm wondering what impact that had on your party as a small party.
No impact.
No impact.
Because they don't get access to that money.
Oh, really?
It's only the Liberals.
mainstream
whoever
parties.
has a seat in the Parliament.
Oh, I see.
That's how it's based on.
Okay, I see.
So it was actually exclusionary, and it was again favoring the dominant party.
And that's why. But
it was completely unfair.
If you don't mind, that is actually also why the NDP was attacking the Liberals more than they were attacking the Conservatives, even though they had far more in common with the Liberals. It's because it was easy to take out the Liberals than the Conservatives, because what they really cared about wasn't taking out the party that they had the least in common with. They cared about increasing their numbers, and they were easier targets. So it is prejudicial almost totally.
Across the board.
It's prejudicial across the board.
Well, now
the way
policy
that
is
the
going to be
system
made
is
by the people that donate most, as opposed to party representing something.
But why is that so surprising? The
Well,
guy that
it's
donates
not.
most, what you're saying is the guy that has
predictable.
money, the guy that has money is going to have more of something. In this case, influence. But I would argue that the guy with money also has more of cars, more of square footage in their home, more of groceries, more of everything. That is, and again, you know what I would propose, another panel, can democracy in its pure form actually exist within a capitalist society? Because capital and democracy are almost totally antithetical to one another. So the guy with money is going to have his voice heard.
Well, why would you think capitalism is something bad?
I never said it was bad.
Those two things can coexist without a problem. The problem we have is accountability and corruption.
Yeah.
You see, there is nothing wrong, and I'm not a wealthy person, okay, now, but I used to be. And there is nothing wrong with a hard-working man in a capitalistic society that works 12, 14 hours a day and wants to make a living, and a better living than a guy that doesn't care and works 4 hours a day part-time.
I agree.
I worked all my life very hard because I wanted to achieve more than your average Joe, so to speak. So I did possess. I had nine houses. I owned property. I had many cars and different other things. 400 oil paintings and stuff like that. And now a person can come to me and say, you know what? I disagree that you have all that stuff. And I would say, I disagree with your disagreement, because if you want it, go to work and work. So there is nothing wrong with capitalism in a democratic society. But the problem is corruption. And that's what I want to address. Corruption and lack of accountability. Because if the government that is in power right now would look at the media and those banning of the other parties just because they are nobodies, they are the faceless nobodies, no power, no money behind, why would waste our airtime for them? And if I was in power, I would say, then I guess you're not going to air the debate. Because if you don't want to give the same opportunity to those other people, why should I sit in front of your cameras and allow you to make millions of dollars out of my career, kind of, political movement or whatever? Then the government is forcing the media to be accountable. Then the government would set the precedence, an example, to say, listen, we may have millions of people that vote for us. Those guys got only few people, but you know what? In a democracy, we're going to give them a fair treatment and a fair rights. Because there is lack of accountability at the municipal level, you can see it in Calgary very clearly if you're following news. And don't take everything they say, because if you want to be amused, lots of jokes there. In Calgary Sun or Herald, I'm actually banned from Calgary Sun. I cannot even make comments because my comments were too Christ-like and no hate, okay, not even there, and I'm banned. So the thing is, we don't make those funny boys accountable. The government doesn't make them accountable. The media are doing whatever they want to do. They're owned by 2 families or 3 families, and they run the show. They do and say whatever their point of view is, their ideology is. And the government does not make them accountable because they are not accountable themselves. They spend money like crazy. They don't care about the voters as long as they got into the power. They right.
Can I say just a couple of things? See, another thing. There's corruption, and then there's doing something illegal, and those are 2 different things. You know how. I watch a lot of, and I hate to say this, but I watch some CNN when I'm really, really tired. And there's all of these sensational cases about people that kill their wives so that they can be with their mistress. And every single lawyer stands up in front of the judge or the jury and they say, you know what? This guy cheated on his wife, but that doesn't make him a killer. We have accepted, we've embraced corruption. We've embraced it. We made it part of our lives.
Some of us have.
We know, as a social collective, I submit to you, if what you're saying is true, and it is, why were the Conservatives given a majority in office? If that's the case, why isn't it when somebody demonstrates an extraordinary lack of character, how is it that they could be re-elected?
But you know,
Well,
in
it was
comparison
because
to the,
Paul Martin got punished for being accountable.
It's also
That
the
was
system,
the biggest one of
system
the
in
biggest
Canada.
reasons.
The system in
That's the
Canada.
problem.
no, Liberal Party shot themselves for
In the
so many
face.
years, and they did so much
They did.
corruption, including $1 billion disappearing, and Chrétien saying it was not me. Where is the money? I don't know. Kind of stuff. That was enough. People were sick and tired. So is Conservative Party the best? And
But it also
ideal?
links back to the system too, because you're only, again, we're coming back to what I was
Accountability.
you're only seeing three parties, so your choice is so limited.
But
if
we don't
if
make
we
them-
had that span, that pluralistic, expansive electoral discourse,
Well,
maybe
then-
they wouldn't be in there.
That's right. But if we have
But
to
it's
make
kind of
people accountable.
pushing that agenda.
We have to have
Yeah.
some kind of a law that makes those people accountable in the media and in the political
But we
system.
can't, because right now in the parliament, this is kind of off topic, but the majority of the MPs decide the electoral law. And that's why we have the system we have.
Well, then why don't we can? Great, humankind has conquered greater. We've slain greater dragons.
Yeah.
Why we could reject the media? We can reject it.
Of course.
I mean, it costs nothing to set up a blog.
Yeah.
It costs
Yeah.
nothing to start a domain name, and the vast majority of people here have not just internet, but actually have high-speed internet.
Yeah.
We could reach people, but the public has to want it,
Yeah.
and that's the problem.
I'm going to turn to the observers now. Is there any comments, questions that want to come from the observers?
As I was listening in, I listened to a lot of what Stephen had said about how democracy, especially in the Canadian context anyways, and a lot of other contexts, can really become, air quotes, filtered democracy, where choice is kind of an illusion. And I believe that that's happening here in Canada as well, and I'll get back to that with my question. But one thing that I wanted to kind of address was when everyone was speaking of the marketplace of ideas and having people's ideas free-flowing, and this came up a lot in the Muslim and Islam nations, where people's ideas, why aren't they, I guess, as readily available as they are here in Canada? And I think that that's because it's created on, like, people are kind of filtered with fear, and it limits their choice to what happens in a lot of these societies where this illusionary democracy takes place. So I think that just kind of creates the filter more. Like you said, if someone has a gun to your children's head and says, we're creating a democracy, who are you going to vote for? I mean, I believe it's out of fear that a lot of these people really get filtered into that democracy. However, my question comes back to the Canadian context. And when I went to my voting card, like, this doesn't even have to do with anything with, well, politics beforehand, but when it comes down to my vote, when I went into the poll, I only had 4 choices on my card. So I mean, even if we have democracy and we have these laws in place and we have everything you guys are speaking about to create, I mean, this marketplace of ideas, how is it that I only have 4 choices on my card? So my question to the panel: in Canada, I believe, worldwide, I believe that there is, whether they specify it in their constitution or not, I believe that there are banning of political parties in a high majority of countries, I'll say. But my question to you guys is, if this is true, is the government banning the parties? Are the people banning the parties themselves? Or are the parties banning themselves?
It's the government. In every country is government. Because only the person that has the power can ban anyone from anything.
I think in the Canadian context, it's systematic. It's been legislated. It's become part of the culture. It's not topic of mainstream discussion, and it's happening. There are protests from Christian Heritage and other parties. They know what's going on. They're speaking, but they're being silenced. They're being censored in the media. It's just not getting out there. They actually do other things too. I talked to a member of one of the small parties, and every year the small parties get invited to what's called the broadcast meeting, and they decide on the airtime. And every year, the Conservatives and Liberals and NDP vote no on creating an equal airtime space for all the parties. And the rules have been decided in that committee that it has to be unanimous of all the parties. So and then again, it's ruled against, and then it goes to the arbitrator, and he just keeps the status quo. And right now, small parties get only 2 minutes or something of airtime.
Michel Foucault, which I'm sure some people here are familiar with his writings, he wrote in his writing, Docile Bodies, he wrote about prisons and how being in a physical prison is one thing, because you could see the bar, you could see the cell that you're in, you know the dimensions of it, you know who the prison guard is, you know when lights go on, lights go off. You have very, very clearly defined parameters that inform your state of mind as a prisoner. And then he compared that to people that are in a prison but do not have those parameters to inform their imprisonment. And he came to the conclusion that the fact that the person that knows that he's in a prison knows the dimensions of that prison and all that it comes with, that the person that is inside of the prison without knowing it is the one that is far worse off. Yeah. And the guy that will never break out. And the reason is they actually don't know it. Yeah. And that's where we are.
That's a really good example. And I can put that into real context. The FDA did an electoral audit on all the registered parties last federal election. It was beautiful. It was a beautiful spectrum of ideas from all these parties. And not all of them were good in the parties, but there were good nuggets in all of them. And when I saw the national debate, it made me cringe, because all that beauty was just sucked out of it. And we just got this sterile debate. And I see how much our democracy is deprived, and it's not even close to what it could be. And it links back to what you guys are saying, the free market of ideas. We are not getting that.
But we're not demanding it, because all we care about are wedge issues. Where does this person stand on abortion, on the long gun registry, on the GST, on immigration? We want 5 easily digestible sound bites, talking faces, show up in the media, and that is what we want to base our decisions on.
We demand more of our media, because, I mean, up until the 1980s, the rules were much more stringent with regard to our debates. I'm old enough to remember Pierre Trudeau and Joe Clark, one-on-one. Pierre Trudeau and Ed Broadbent, one-on-one. Broadbent and Joe Clark, one-on-one. Where there was a set of prepared questions which the moderator would ask, and each party leader would have the opportunity to respond and have a genuine debate. But over the past 10 to 15 years, it has degenerated into this free-for-all where you might as well just set somebody down at the town legion and get everybody liquored up and then have a debate.
They want a soundbite.
They want the soundbite.
But not only that, it's exclusionary.
So how
It
do
is
we change
exclusionary.
that?
That is the subject of a future podcast. That definitely is. And same with your idea. I don't think we can broach that tonight, but is there any other comments from the observers?
I just got one thing to say.
All right.
Everyone was throwing around the term, well, people that were in favor of banning parties were throwing around the term reasonable limits. And I just want to say that the reasonable limits are set by the party in power, and your reasonable limits and my reasonable limits are probably different. So how do we reconcile that? Like, what is the definition of reasonable limits? And that can always change. And how can you define reasonable limits?
That's a very good question, because, let's say 50 years ago, abortion was something that no one would even think that can be legalized. Mm-hmm. Like, come on, murdering innocent children that have no voice, unthinkable. Yes, women did have illegal abortions, but as a standard, as a morale for the whole society, there was bad, there was evil, there was bad. The same with homosexuality. If you would see 2 guys walking on the streets 50 years ago, they would be beaten up on the streets. They would be banned from the city, get out. So lots of things change as society changes, as moral standards are changing, so the views and laws are changing as well. How you can restrict that, it's impossible. Depends of society that will come a few years from now. But based today on what we have today, we can make our decisions. So today, there are limits that are good. You spread hatred, you should be bound. You want to kill people, you should not have a political party. You want to do stuff that are illegal, you should not have the right and registered right to spread that even further. Those should be limits. For years, I have been labeled as a lawbreaker in the city of Calgary by various departments, but the truth is I'm a law-abiding citizen. I am for law. I stand for law. Law is a good thing. Lawless society is not a good society, believe me. But there should be limits. And what I'm getting at, everyone should be accountable. You're accountable, and the police officer, and the judge, and the politician should be accountable. In other words, we have those restrictions, and they are good restrictions. You cannot break into my house. That's a good restriction. That's a good limitation. I like that limitation. If you do break into my house, I have a right to protect myself. That's a good law. So there are some good laws. And the same with this, you cannot, predict what will happen in 50 years, how the government will change and moral standards will change. But today we know what we have. And today, if Hamas would come and say, I want to start a political party, I would be the first one to shout, to yell from the rooftops, don't do that, because those people, what they bring is not good in a democratic society. Don't give them the power. Don't give them voice, because that's not the voice we want to hear and be taught to our children. So what will happen in 10, 20 years, I guess that's up to you and your children and my children. I hope, and that's what I teach my children. Actually, today I was teaching democracy to my son, because I want him to know what are his rights, what are his responsibilities. I want him to grow up a good citizen of this country that values democracy and freedoms, that values another person's rights. But also, with that comes great responsibility. If you guys, especially young people, if you're not too careful, 50 years from now, your moral standards will be so low that everything will go. They are already discussing euthanasia.
Is it reasonable? Like, why if the party in power decides that every party that advocates euthanasia should be banned, and they find that reasonable, is that reasonable?
I think that's not. I don't think that's the way to go about it. The party in power should say we value every life. And
see, that's a perfect example.
But that's
of
not
how.
reasonable to me.
But who has a right to kill, a murder?
But that's your
You're
opinion,
imposing your values.
Exactly.
on everyone.
See, the thing is,
That bugs me.
Archer, here's the thing. Morgenthaler happened. It happened. Abortion is legal. Okay, it's legal. It came before different justices many times. Abortion is still legal. That is what our society, the majority of our society, wants. You can't say that they should want something else, because then it's mayhem. Everybody could throw up the thing.
That's not true. That's not true, because if there was a referendum, if they would come a political leader, bold enough, brave enough, that will give this in the hands of the people, I think the outcome could be different, because the judges are just few people.
God bless
I'm telling you, if Stephen Harper, instead of going with this Mickey Mouse monkey political game with homosexuality, instead of talking back and forth with some political buffoons, would say, I'm giving the power where it belongs to the people. You guys choose, should homosexuality be legalized? Just let a second.
No, please.
Let me finish.
I'm going to need to address this
But
after
let me
you're done,
finish.
please.
Should the homosexuality be legal or illegal in this country? The marriage I'm talking about.
And we've
Let
already
the
decided.
people decide. No,
decided
you
that.
didn't. No.
Gentlemen.
Few guys decided, few judges decided, but people did not decide it. So the way to do it with this kind of a moral problems that you raised is to give back from the government, so from few people and few judges, give it back to the people by the referendum.
No, it's the Constitution that determines it.
Please.
The Constitution was changed by few people, not by the majority of people. That's my problem.
That's a misconception. There were hundreds of people who were
No,
consulted
that's
during
not
that entire
true.
process.
The
It's not-
majority of Canadians did not choose to change their constitution. It was few proudful buffoons paid by another proudful buffoons that made the decision for me. And as a Canadian, I never had the chance to have a say in this issue. And my father and my mother that are Canadian citizens, they never had a chance to say yes or no in this issue. That's dictatorship.
If there was a plebiscite, sir, 200 years ago in the United States saying that slave ownership, good or bad, legal or illegal, how would it have gone?
Certainly in the South, it would have gone.
It
in
did
favor of
go.
slavery.
No, it wasn't a plebiscite. It was the courts.
No.
It was the
no,
courts,
sir.
absolutely.
It was
It wasn't.
1847 Civil War that decided, because half of the country disagreed with ownership of slaves.
It was the courts that gave black people the Brown versus School Board.
In 1984
yeah,
desegregation.
there you go.
Brown
It was
But
the
that was
courts,
after the Civil War.
sir. It was the courts that said that black children could go to school with white children, because if there was a plebiscite in the court of public decision opinion, they decided. They said, no, I don't want my kids going to school with black kids. So you know what? There is your limit needs a limit, sir, because it's not always applicable.
You could have an entire podcast about the myth of the rule of majority, because the rule of majority often does involve trampling on the rights of individuals.
Tyranny of the majority.
Tyranny of the majority.
Yeah. Is there any closing remarks on the issue of banning, not banning political parties?
I've got one.
Sure.
I didn't come in here with a fully formed opinion, and as I said, I was willing to have my mind changed, and I think it has been. Well, I'm a little unsettled with the idea of that banning parties is totally wrong, but then armed insurrection, the reconciliation of those two, I think, is still not quite there with me. But I think that the marketplace of ideas has a very important role to play, if only to get understanding and not having single-minded viewpoints festering and taking over a segment of the population.
And that's what I was just going to link in. Maybe the phrase needs to be changed. Marketplace of ideas. The marketplace is not perfect. And as we see in Canada, there are the media, for example, the marketplace of mass media communication is anything but pluralistic in terms of content. So that's something that needs to be looked at. There are countries in this world that are dealing directly with that issue. Bolivia has the most advanced mass media communication laws in this world. It's incredible what they're doing there. Also France, Norway. Norway has pretty advanced media ownership concentration laws. I would just recommend that phrase be looked at and maybe refined a bit.
In closing, what I'd like to talk about is democracy ought to be the best system that we have. It has the most potential to be perfected of any other political system. But just like anything else, it needs to be refined. And who's to say that it's not going to take a long time? Who's to say that it's not going to take? I'll remind you that it was not a decade ago that the Spanish people overwhelmingly rejected Spain's involvement in the war in Iraq. Overwhelmingly, 88%, 4 million people spilled out onto the streets. 4 million, one of the biggest demonstrations in history. 4 million people. And what did Spain do? They overwhelmingly supported their involvement in the war in Iraq. And what happened? Did the world implode? Did it get thrown off of its axis? No. It just kept going. And you know what? We have to stand up and reject. We have to reject this. We have to reject when we scream at the top of our lungs that we desire something, that we speak with one voice on an issue, and we're not listened to. We have to reject that. And that is what's going to perfect this marketplace. And by the way, in marketplaces, monopolies are illegal. So that speaks to the media.
I just want to say, first of all, how much fun I've had tonight. I can say with certainty, Artur, that you and I will not agree on abortion, but I don't have 5 hours tonight to carry on the conversation. I think it's safe to say there's some things we'd agree on. And I think on that note, for me, democracy is a work in progress. I don't think there's any such thing as a perfect society. When I look at history and my reading of history, any political party, any ideology, any person which has talked about perfecting humankind inevitably within a generation we've gone from an ideology of perfecting man to enslaving millions and even killing millions, and you come from a part of Europe where that was a reality for much of the last century. I think that as long as we are able to have these kinds of discussions, even passionate and even at times heated, but still walk away from the table, with respect for each other as individuals, then I think that we have, to paraphrase Churchill, if not the best system, then the best of the worst. So I think to address your question, how do we ensure that there's greater democracy? I think we need to have transparency, and I think we need to constantly be on guard against tyrants, whether they be individuals or whether they be political parties. One of the problems which I see in our society with the concentration of media ownership, and thanks again to our moderator for bringing up that point 2/3 into the conversation, where we have this illusion of democracy, this illusion of the freedom of the marketplace, when in fact there are entire groups of people are frozen out of the process because of concentration of media ownership, because corporate interests dominate the economic agenda, and indeed the political agenda. These are things that we need to work on. There's a false dichotomy that the media loves. It's black or white. It's conservative or liberal.
Coke or Pepsi?
Yeah, Coke or Pepsi. There's an inevitable problem with that sort of dichotomy, because it doesn't account for the fact that even amongst people who may disagree passionately about one issue, we will find other issues in which we agree on. So I think it's important to have a transparent society, and this concentration of media ownership, I think, is an issue that needs to be addressed. Just one last point. I think many people who would vote Republican in the United States and are Republican lights up here in Alberta would be shocked, or maybe they just don't want to hear about one of the most radical presidents in American history, was Teddy Roosevelt, a Republican who campaigned against trust. He was known as trust-busting Teddy because he busted up monopolies in the United States in the utilities, and he saw the problem with corporate media ownership, and he passed legislation under his administration, 1904 to 1912, which broke up monopolies. Unfortunately, monopolies re-arose in another form 50 years later. But there's a precedent in American history for dissent, which unfortunately doesn't seem to be dominating the American discourse these days.
I want to say that a perfect democracy and what we grade our scale on in the FDA is the voters' say and their right to opinion. And so I do stand by my original position that ideology is not illegal. It's the act that's illegal. And though I might totally disagree with your platform, I completely respect your right to have it. So I hope that that's how it always be.
I'm the same way. I just think once we start saying you can't have a party, where do we draw the line? And whoever's in government decides. So, if it's left wing, right wing, whatever it is once we start drawing lines, then when does it stop? That would be my only concern, and that's why I stand to my position. I think a true democracy, everyone has a voice, and the people vote in the political party, if it's not corrupt, that they want in, right? So if Hamas comes and people vote in Hamas, then it's the people that voted them in. And it's very encouraging to me to look around the world and seeing the underground movement. You see in Syria, Egypt, people in the ground movement actually changing things in their country, and that can happen.
I, on the other hand, do not believe in perfect democracy. I don't believe that such exists and will ever exist. So therefore, we have to deal with corruptible people, and I believe in reasonable limits, because people are not perfect and anything can happen. So I would, if I was in power, so don't vote me in, I would ban any party or any group or any business or media that would entice violence, hatred, and would become a threat to human rights. I would deliberately, openly ban them and say, in this country that I love, in this country that my kids were born and growing up, this party or this organization has no place to exist. And that would be my take. And if I had the power, I would do it.
Just regarding the advocates of not banning political parties, as I said earlier, like in Canada, there's minimal barriers to being registered as a political party, but there's a subtle indirect campaign of banning them in the sense that they have no reasonable chance of forming government. So that's something people need to be aware of, that banning can take different forms. It can be very direct, like in Egypt, where it says religious-based parties are banned. But in other countries, it's behind the scenes, it's in the fine print, it's very subtle. So I think that's links back to the imperfection, and people have to be on guard for that, because it bothers me, because if the Christian Heritage Party, I may not vote for them, but if they're being banned, and I don't think they should be banned, that's impacting me and every single Canadian. That's infringing on our democracy. And we should all be concerned about that. It could be a Muslim party or even some atheist party. It doesn't matter. We're all in this together. It's impacting our freedom of expression, our right to form.
Thank you very much for listening in to this episode of the Foundation for Democratic Advancement's podcast. For the FDA to continue to improve democratic processes worldwide, we rely upon your generous donations. To donate to the FDA, please visit our website at www.democracychange.org. To learn more about our mission, vision, and work, you can also visit us on Facebook and on